Do you have a Prusa Mark III that you still need to upgrade to the Mark IIIS? Me too. Prusa Research does a pretty nice job about releasing maintenance upgrades for the 3D printer. They did it with the Mark II, and now they've done it with the Mark III, the Mark IIIS. And you can get a kit that's relatively inexpensive to go from a Mark III to a Mark IIIS, which is this right here. Now this upgrade is mainly focused on the extruder body and the filament sensor, and Prusa has a guide that will walk you step by step through this upgrade, so it doesn't make a lot of sense me showing you how to do this, but I know I had a lot of questions about what was in the upgrade when it came out, so I thought we'd take a look at what's in the box, see what it's going to upgrade, and all the steps that it takes to get it completed. And we can start by checking out what's in this kit. So with the kit, they give you filament to print out all your own parts, so you will need to print all your parts first. We have our documentation, our cheat sheet about all the bolt sizes. These actually do come in handy. Information on how to print your parts. Zip ties and our new filament sensor. All the hardware that's required for the upgrade. The magnets. Some sleeving. And your filament. It's probably important to note that you need to print all of these parts in black PETG. That's what Prusa says works best with their sensor. So we've got all our hardware, and before we take apart our printer, we need some printed parts. One moment. And done. Let's take a look at the parts we printed. We have the new extruder body, the X carriage, the back of the X carriage, the adapter, this holds a steel ball, our cable holder, the extruder body cover, the idler door, our extruder motor plate, our filament sensor cover, the filament sensor lever, and our part fan support. Now we also do have this fan duct. I printed it in PETG, but Prusa says it has to be in ABS, and they do give you one of these with the parts kit. So we're covered there. So we do have to take apart the X carriage, and that's a little bit of work, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward. Prusa does have really good instructions. So let's get started with the disassembly of our Mark III. So we're going to start by opening up the electronics box. And we need to get a little bit of slack on some of these wires. So we're going to release these two screws up here to let this wire loom go. And if yours was built by Prusa, you're probably going to have some zip strips on these wires. Mine was a kit, so I didn't add those, so I don't need to cut them. And then on the back of the X carriage, we want to cut all 5 of these zip ties on here. Like so. And we can go ahead and take this textile sleeve off. And we're going to unhook all the wires that run to the extruder. So we'll start with the filament sensor down here, the Penda probe right here, the front print fan right here, the hot end fan right next to it right here, the extruder thermistor right here, the extruder heater over here, we can just take out that whole plug, and the extruder motor, the bottom motor cable right here. And there's all the wires loose going to the extruder. Now onto the back of the extruder, we want to take out these 5 screws, 2 here, 1 in the center, and then these 2 down on the bottom. Once all 5 of those are loose, you can just kind of pull this back off. They should come with it. Be careful of the wires. We can go ahead and unplug the old filament sensor wire. We don't need this anymore. They give us a new one for that. And we'll separate the wires out of the plastic part, go left and right, just to get them out of the way. Now we'll take the front portion of the extruder off. We can release it with this screw and these 2 in the center. And with those loose, you should be able to just pull this off and you can just set it on the print bed. Just be mindful of your wires. There we go. You can remove your nylon piece that gets loomed in with your wires. You can remove these 2 zip ties that hold the bearings in. And we can slide out the belt. Just let it hang loose for now. We will be putting this belt back on. And the belt's off. You might have to get some pliers to get that out of there. It is stuck in there pretty good. Go ahead and pull all your wires out of the old back of the X housing. Probably have to do them one by one. Then we'll move to the front of the printer and start working on the extruder body. The only thing that you're going to notice that's different about my machine is I have a mosaic adapter for my pallet too. You're going to probably just have the standard one. This is the only modification that I've done. This is so I can use that PTFE tube that hooks into it. But everything else should be the same on yours. So we'll remove the 4 screws that hold on the hot end fan. We can swing it out of the way. And we're going to take the part fan off, but before we do that, we need to remove the fan shroud. So this screw right here. So there's the duct. And then we can take this part fan screw out. Swing our part fan out of the way. We need to remove our part fan holder. You'll probably need that ball end Allen key that comes with your Prusa kit to be able to get in there. That's off, and now we can remove the 2 idler door screws. Be careful, these are spring loaded, and it never hurts to have a couple of those spare springs around, so don't lose them. Just back these 2 out slow. The idler springs are out. Now we can flip over, and we can take out these 3 screws that hold the extruder motor on. And the body should slide right off of that motor. We can swing our motor out of the way, and then we'll take out this screw over here to release our pin to probe. Your idler door and everything is now loose. You can set that aside. Then we can slide our pin to probe out, swing it out of the way. And then on the front of the body, this is the door. We can take these 2 screws out to get that hot end out of there. We can lift the door off. Then to get the hot end out, you need to tilt it and lift at the same time. And it's out. We can take out our tube, just press down on this collar, should be able to pull it out. And they want us to go ahead and open up the upgrade kit and load that new PTFE tube before we get confused. So let's go ahead and do that. The new one and the old one are a different length, so you want to make sure you're using the right one. And the new one is beveled on the side that goes down. You want to slide it in as far as it'll go, and then lift that collar so it'll lock it into place. Just like that. Now the Bondtech gear needs to come off. And I have the kit version, so mine's not glued, but some of the factory assembled ones might be, so you'll have to heat it up with a heat gun to get it off of there. Fortunately, mine's not, so I can just remove this set screw, and it should slide off. Bondtech gear's off. We will need this guy for later. And on our idler door, we need to get this Bondtech gear out of here as well. There are roller bearings in here, so be careful, but we need to push this pin through. I'm just going to use an Allen wrench. And my pin and my gears are out. Make sure you don't lose those bearings. And you don't have to, but you can go ahead and remove these 2 screws and get that filament sensor out of there if you want to. The cover's off. You need to remove this screw to get that sensor out. And then it should lift right out of there. Well, it's all apart. Now we got to put it back together. Now you don't have to worry about any of the old plastic parts. Those will all be replaced by the ones you printed or the hardware. It all comes new in the kit. And the filament sensor is also swapped out from the kit with the wire. Everything else should stay the same. We're going to have to reuse it. So let's get back to work and put it back together. We're going to start with the extruder body assembly. We need to put some M3 nuts in these holes, and there's a couple of tricks to that. To make sure they're pressed in the hole good, you can put them on the end of a longer screw and just try to tap them in like that. But if that's not working for you, my favorite method is to take a little shorter screw from the other side and actually pull it in. So we'll insert it on this side. And if you just tighten the screw down a bit, it pulls it in and seats it really well. That seems to work the best. And then you can just remove that screw. So we've got our hex nuts in. Now we need a couple of square nuts, one here and one here. You should be able to just slide those in the holes. Some of these go in pretty far. I just push them in with the Allen wrench if I need to. There's the 2 square nuts. And we need an M3 by 10 millimeter screw for the pin to probe mount. And the easiest way to tell all these screws apart, because you have 18s and 20s screws that are pretty close to each other, is to use the sheet that Prusa gives you. Those are actual size, so you can just go find the screw that's close, match it up on the paper, and that saves you from having to measure each screw to figure out which one's which, because the length is important. So here's the 10 we need. It goes right here. No need to snug it up for now. We'll snug it up when we put the pin to probe back on. If you printed these yourself, you'll notice this gap is connected. You can just cut this plastic out in between, because these do have to move to be able to pinch that probe. I just use my clippers. Looks like that. Now we'll take our filament sensor arm and our smaller magnet, this one here, and we'll just slide it in. Like that. And then your filament sensor arm goes in your body. It sets in here right like this. It gets attached with an M3 by 18 millimeter screw right there. You want to put that screw on just tight enough. This does have to move. And then we insert the larger magnet in this hole right here. The larger magnet needs to repel this magnet, so make sure you have the right side flipped. It's pretty easy to tell because these magnets are really strong. It should look like that. Now we'll take our adapter part and we'll install our steel ball right there. Make sure your ball does roll smoothly inside your printed part. And then our adapter goes in the top of this body with the steel ball facing that filament arm, just like that. Now we'll move to assembling the extruder motor. We'll put the extruder motor plate on. This is the side that the hot end goes in. You want to make sure the wire is going down with it, so it'll set just like this. And the flat side of the shaft needs to be exposed in this opening right here so we can put our Bondtech gear back on. And this is attached with two M3 by 10 millimeter screws. One there, and one there. And then our Bondtech gear goes on like this. The set screw needs to be on the flat part of the shaft. We'll just slide it on there for now. This is the one without the bearings inside it. No need to tighten it quite yet. We'll align it here in just a second. To align it, I like to use a small Allen wrench and set it in the housing. The same size that fits the grub screw actually works best, but this will keep that gear in position while you tighten it down. The points on the wrench actually fit pretty well inside the teeth on that gear. Now you can tighten it down. Use the best wrench you can find. You don't want to strip that grub screw, and it has to be pretty tight. And once it's tightened down, it's probably a good idea to come back through with a piece of filament just to make sure it's nice and center. And that looks pretty good right there. Now we'll take the extruder cover piece and we'll slide a square nut in right here. And then back to the body, we're going to set two M3 by 10 millimeter screws right here. Then we'll take our hot end with our new shorter PTFE tube, and it'll set in here just like this. You'll know you have the right tube if it just meets up with the top of that housing. Your hot end cables will be on the opposite side of the pin to probe holder, just like that. Your extruder motor with the housing on it sets just like this, and the cover sets right here. And we'll slide two M3 by 40 millimeter screws in this cover all the way through the body. We can go ahead and snug those two down. Then we can start working on the X carriage. We need to set two M3 hex nuts right down in here, like that, and then we have four square nuts to slide in. One down here on the bottom, one here in the center, and then two up here at the top. And then on the back side, we can route our new filament cable through. It just goes in this channel, and we'll leave about 15 millimeters of the cable hanging out here at the top. The bottom part goes down and through to the front side. Then back to the body, we'll put our extruder cable through the part. I like to leave a little bit on this side. Just kind of sink it down in there and out the back. And then we'll go ahead and put our X carriage on the back of that. That motor cable goes in the same channel as your filament wire does. Make sure nothing gets pinched. It's pretty easy to do when you tighten this thing down. It routes through like that, and if you're good and nothing's been pinched, you can go ahead and tighten down this screw and the one on the other side to put the whole thing together. Now we can install the new IR type filament sensor that goes on the top. Be careful when you're touching this thing. You don't want to touch the board or any of the chips. I kind of like to hold it back here by the pins. The pins go to the back. It sets in here just like this. And then you have an M2 by 8 millimeter screw that holds it on. It goes right in this hole, right there. Then we can go ahead and put the cable on. The red goes to the inside. The clip on the cable goes up, just like that. And everything with the last little bit of slack can kind of just be pulled back through the body a bit. That looks good right about there. And now that the filament sensor cable's in its final position, we can go ahead and snug these two screws inside the housing up, just to make sure everything's nice and tight. Then we'll put an M3 by 40 millimeter screw here. This actually holds the motor on. It's going to pull this whole housing together. With that screw in, you want to make sure there's no gaps in the side of the housing. It should be nice and snug now. Then we can put our hot end fan back on. We need to make sure all these wires for the extruder motor are nice and tucked back in here. We don't want the fan to pinch those wires. And then on the fan, you just put the wire along the top, just like this. And then the fan wires will set in that same channel where the extruder motor wires go. And then after the wires are all nice and tucked in these three holes, we'll do M3 by 14 millimeter screws. We'll leave this hole empty for now. That's what holds our part fan on. Then we'll build our new idler door. We've got the other side of our Bondtech gear. Make sure both your bearings are still in here. You don't want to lose any of those. The gear sets in here just like this. Make sure you have the teeth on the right side. And then use the shaft that you use in your original door. You should be able to just press this in. Don't force it. You can break this part pretty easy. You want to make sure that pin is nice and flush and the gear turns pretty easy, and it does. And one last check to make sure that that gear is lined up just right. We'll get our filament back out and force it down the path. Mine looks pretty good, but I think the gear could come out this way just a bit. So we'll loosen that up, slide it out just a touch, make sure we're nice and lined up on the flat spot of that motor shaft, and go ahead and tighten it back down. Again, it needs to be pretty tight, but you don't want to strip it. I like that better. That looks good. Now we can go ahead and put our door on. It mounts with an M3 by 40 millimeter screw. It screws right into the extruder motor. You don't want to tighten it down too much because it's the actual hinge for this door, and they'll cause the door to bind. So tighten it down just enough. That should be good right there. And now's a great time to check to make sure your Bondtech gears line up, and mine do. We'll put an M3 hex nut in our idler door. And then we'll take another M3 by 40 and we'll slide the extruder spring on. And then from the opposite side, it'll go through here and then thread into that extruder door. You want to make sure that nut is nice and seated in that extruder door, and your screw should be just a little less than flush with the body. About right there. Then we'll take our part fan mount, we'll put a hex nut in there. Then we'll use an M3 by 10 millimeter screw to mount it right here on the extruder body cover. Right there. Then we're going to use our ABS fan shroud that came with the kit. We'll slide a square nut in right here. And we'll use an M3 by 20 millimeter screw from the front of the hot end fan to attach it to the other side in front of the extruder body door. It should mount right about there. Then our part fan will mount right in here, and we'll secure it on top with an M3 by 20 millimeter screw. And then after the fan's on and everything's nice and lined up, I like to come back and snug this one up a bit just to make sure everything's nice and secure. And then on the other side of the part cooling fan, we're going to put an M3 nut right in here and secure it with an M3 by 20 millimeter screw from the front. Just like that. Don't tighten that one up too much. You can break that fan case pretty easy. From the previous upgrade, my cable has actually been pulled out of the holder, but with this one, you can put it back in. This was the upgrade that I did for the MMU2. You don't need to do that any longer. So we'll put that back in. And we can route that part fan wire through this channel right here. And now we can insert the Penda probe. We need to wrap the wire around the back of the probe. It's going to go in the same channel that the part fan wire goes in. We can just slide it in for now. We're going to have to adjust it later anyway. So that should be good. And now we're going to put the cover on the filament sensor. It just goes on top just like this. Use an M3 by 10 millimeter screw. Make sure the cover is flush with the left side of the extruder body. You can adjust the idler door if it's not. Then we want to load 2 zip ties on the back of our carriage. You want to make sure the head of the zip tie is down, like this. And from the back of the printer, you want the X gantry up a little more than halfway. Those bearings should be touching. And then we can tighten the zip ties all the way. I'm just going to put the head of the zip tie as close to the plastic part as I can. And after they're tight, I'll go ahead and trim the ends off. Now we're going to mine some of the wires. We do have this belt hanging around in here. It'll go in this slot right here. But we'll take the Penda probe and the part fan side and pull it over that bottom rail. And it needs to rest in this guide right here. Same way for the other side with our hot end fan, our filament sensor wire, and our extruder motor. We're just going to take it over that bottom rail and it'll rest in that guide right there. And we can go ahead and reattach our belt. It should be the same length. You shouldn't have to trim it any. We'll put it on this side first. Just tuck it in that part. You want to poke it down in there pretty good. And then from the front, we'll loosen up our X belt tensioner here from the top. No need to take it out, just loosen it up. We'll release these 2 top X motor screws. Pull them both out far enough, pretty much completely loose, so that the head will clear that plastic part. And then you should be able to twist your X motor just enough so that we can get that belt on. And to the back side again, let's go ahead and put the belt in the plastic part. We should now have enough slack to get it in there pretty easy. Then make sure one more time that you're on your gear and on your idler good on both sides. And then you should be able to rotate your X motor and get a pretty good tension on your belt. And if the tension looks good, we can go ahead and rotate the motor back and put these two front screws in. Now's a great time to check your motor pulley. You want to make sure that it's pretty even and the belt is riding pretty much in the center of that pulley. You want the top and the bottom of the belt to be parallel. That's pretty good right there. And if you can hold this motor shaft with a set of pliers and not move the extruder left or right, and the belt doesn't flex at all, you know you have it tight enough. But we will do one more fine tune on the belt tension, so go ahead and release all three of these motor screws just slightly. We'll move the extruder all the way down to the idler side, and we'll check the tension of the belt in the middle. Now that's kind of easy to touch the belt together, so it probably needs to be just a little bit tighter. So this top screw here, we'll give it 1 or 2 turns. You can keep testing the belt in the center, giving it a few more turns until it gets nice and tight. And when it's just a little bit hard to touch the belt together, that's about perfect. And when you're happy with the belt tension, go ahead and tighten up these 3 screws. Looks good. The tension should be just right. Now we'll move to start finishing up some of the wiring. We want to take our nylon guide piece, and there's a hole right down here. It can be kind of hard to get that in there, so you might want to use some pliers. And if you have it in there properly, you can't pull it out easily. You can actually tug on the whole printer. It's got to be nice and tight. Now we'll take our cable holder plastic piece and one of our M3x40 screws, just throw it through here. And in the back of our X carriage, we need to put a hex nut right in here. I just use my pliers to put it in there, but make sure it's pressed down in there pretty good. And then we'll screw our wire management piece to the back plate, just like this. It's got a groove in the top where the wires go, so that needs to go up. We'll thread our hot end fan, our filament sensor, and our extruder motor cables first through this part. And then the 2 on the right side for the pin probe and the part fan. And then we'll thread our nylon piece through. Just like that. And this will slide on the back of the X carriage. Mind your wires as you're putting this in. Make sure, again, nothing is pinched. And we're going to attach it with 4 M3x10mm screws, 2 here, 1 here, and then 1 down here. All 4 of our screws are now on, holding the back plate to the extruder, and everything's nice and snug. Then we can go ahead and start putting our sleeving on. You want to leave the hot end heater and the thermistor out for now, just these upper wires. We'll get it started above this plastic cable manager piece, and then we'll throw some zip ties on there, and then we can add these 2 wires in after that. So we've got the sleeve started. Now we want to put 3 top zip ties up here. They go through this plastic piece. You want the head of the zip tie to lay like this. So you want to stick it through from this side. It goes in the 3 lower holes to wrap around the top. And you want them to set just like this on the top, or they're going to collide with different parts of the printer. So we'll put 3 on, 1 inside, 1 in the center, and 1 on the outside. Then we can bring the heater and the thermistor wires up. They're going to set right underneath. They're going to come in from the same direction, but they're going to face down. So there's 2 of those, 1 in the front and 1 in the back. And when you snug those up, you want your wires underneath, and then the head of the zip tie can just rest on top of the wires. Something like that. Then we can add our hot end and thermistor wires to our bundle and put on the rest of our sleeve. And I don't know if this is how you're supposed to do it, but I actually like to give it a little twist after it's been put on. It seems to hold in there a little better. Now we're about ready to wire everything back up, but first we need to make sure all the wire's clear and the pin is going to clear. The highest part on the bed is this bed wire cover right here, so we want to make sure that's going to clear. So with the nozzle almost touching the bed, I'm going to bring the bed and the nozzle over to that area. I'm going to make sure there's plenty of gap in between the wires and that cover, and there is. Now we can start feeding our wires back into our control box. We want to feed our piece of nylon into this hole right here on the top. That'll hold our wires. We can feed our wires in, but then we want to unscrew the sleeve just enough to get it almost the whole length of the holder, just so it grips it good enough. About right there is good. And then we can put our control box holder back on. And we're good. Now we can start plugging everything back in. And for the first connection, you want to double and triple check this, because if you plug in the filament sensor wrong, it'll burn the sensor up. You have to use the bottom row of pins right here for your filament sensor. And it has to go a very particular way. There's 5 pins. There's 5 pins on your cable. The red wire needs to go to the outside. It has to go just like that. Again, check this a couple of times. It has to be on the bottom row, red wire to the outside of the control box. Make sure it's lined up on those pins perfectly. Then we'll plug in the extruder motor. It's down in here. We'll plug in the hot end heater. It's right there. We'll plug in the hot end fan. It's the black wire. It's right next to that hot end heater. Right there. Right next to it, the print fan. The clips on these face down. Right there. Right above it, the extruder thermistor. It's the one on the very right. Right there. And then finally, the Pinda probe up top here, right here. And that should be it. We can close up our case. Go ahead and latch it back up with our screw. And then one last thing, I want to get a rough height for my Pinda probe. So I'm going to bring my nozzle down until it just touches the bed. And this is with the steel sheet on. I'm going to slide a zip tie underneath my probe. I want to push the probe down until it rests on that zip tie. And then I'm going to tighten up that screw. And that should give you a good rough starting height for your probe. You can make up the rest with Live Z Adjust. So the hardware and electronics portion of the upgrade is done, and it did take a while, but we're not quite done yet. There is a difference in between Mark III and Mark III's firmware. We did change the filament sensor, so we need to go download that and reflash, and I'm sure we'll have to run a calibration after that. So let's head to the Prusa site. So we'll head over to Prusa, go up here to support, drivers, firmware, manuals, and we want to make sure we're getting the latest firmware for the Mark IIIS. Mark III's down here, we now have an S. So we'll download this, 3.7.1. You can go ahead and get your drivers and apps if you don't have those already or if you haven't upgraded them in a while. The newest version is Prusa Slicer, so long Slick3R. So let's go to downloads, right click, and we'll extract all. And now we can open Slick3R. I haven't upgraded a Prusa Slicer yet. Make sure you're cabled up USB to your printer and it's turned on. And if we go to configuration, we can go to flash printer firmware. It's going to automatically recognize our printer. It's calling it a Mark III right now. We'll browse, downloads, make sure we have the Mark IIIS version right here. Hit open. We'll go ahead and hit flash. And the flash was successful. It's going to give you a warning that says printer type has changed because it has. Just click the button. It's just letting you know that it found the old settings, so PID and E steps are going to be the same, so don't worry about that. We'll just click it again. But if we go into the menu and we head down to settings, we want to turn our new filament sensor on. That will automatically turn on auto load, which is good. And if we go down to Live Z Adjust, it does have our adjustment settings. So it saved that from the previous version. But it's still probably a good idea to run through a calibration. So let's do that real quick. In the menu, go down to calibration. Let's just start with the wizard. It'll do it all. Running this will delete your current settings. That's fine. You want to begin? Yes. It's going to give you some information. We'll run through the setup process. Yes. You're going to check the fans. Extruder fan's okay. Is the hot end fan spinning? No. Front fan spinning? Yes. Print fan okay. Now we're going to check the axes. X, Y, and Z are good. Now we're heating up the bed. Make sure it's working. It's working. Now we're going to check the hot end. Self-test looks good. All correct. Now it's going to calibrate X, Y, and Z for skew and level. So we'll click OK. We're going to home. Then we're going to run all the way to the top of the Z to make sure it's level. It's going to level at the very top, both sides. We'll make sure the nozzle is clear. Click OK. Steel sheet is on. We'll say yes. Please remove steel sheet. And we'll hit OK. Put a piece of paper on the bed to keep the nozzle from scratching it in case it's too low. I'm pretty confident that this one's set up correctly, so I'm not going to do that. We'll go ahead and hit OK. Now it's going to go around, probe the bed, and figure out if there's any skew. Then we need to put our steel sheet back on and hit continue. And we're perpendicular. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and clean the steel sheet off for this next step. And we'll click OK. Is filament loaded? No. It's going to preheat for PLA. It's bringing in the filament. Filament change is successful. We'll hit yes. Now we'll calibrate the first layer. It's going to start laying down our test pattern. You can see it's not making a very sharp corner, so we'll go ahead and bring it down some using Live Z Adjust. Corner still isn't quite stuck. Let's go ahead and bring it down a little more. We'll check and see if we can pull it off real easy. We can. We'll bring it down a little more. Still needs to come down a little bit more. And I wasn't quite happy with that run, so we're going to cycle through it one more time. We're just going to hit yes. And we're at 900. That looks pretty good. And we're done. It was a big upgrade and it took quite a bit of time, but I think it's going to be worth it going forward. I like the way the new filament sensor works with the manual piece that triggers the optical sensor. That should work a lot better than the old one. We do lose jam detection, but I never really got to test that successfully in the first place. I also like the new extruder body. It's a lot cleaner, and I think down the road if you have an issue like a jam, it's going to be a lot easier to take apart and clear it than the old one. And Prusa does have a really good guide on how to do this upgrade, so you probably don't need to watch this step by step, but I thought it might be interesting to show you what it takes to take your Mark III to a Mark IIIS. I hope you liked this video or you found it helpful. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing to my channel. If not, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.